I never thought I would hear a school principal say this about my 10-year-old daughter. And not behind closed doors. Right there, in front of her. The words hit me like a punch, leaving my chest tight and my mind scrambling for sense. This school isn't for children like her. I paused, stunned. My daughter, Emily, standing next to me, looked confused, her small hands gripping the straps of her backpack as if it were her only anchor. How could anyone dismiss a child like that? She's bright, kind, imaginative. She loves reading, drawing, and asking questions that sometimes make adults uncomfortable. But nothing in her nature deserves this. Nothing. Or at least that's what I thought. But before we continue, please subscribe and turn on the notification bell for updates. It started as an ordinary Wednesday. Emily had been sent home early from school, her backpack left waiting at the office. The secretary, Mrs. Reynolds, avoided my eyes when I arrived, shuffling papers and muttering something about procedures. Her discomfort was palpable. I knew, just by looking at her, that something was wrong. But I didn't know how wrong. I didn't know the storm I was walking into. As I approached the office door, a knot tightened in my stomach. I could see Emily's reflection in the glass, her eyes wide, trying to make sense of why her school day had ended abruptly. I tried to stay calm. I tried to breathe. But when Principal Thompson stepped out, his presence alone made the hallway feel smaller, heavier. And then he said it, the words I still hear echoing in my mind. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't yell. I simply said, understood. But inside, everything shifted. The world I had trusted for my child, the school, the teachers, the routines I thought were safe, cracked in that single moment. My heart was racing, my mind spinning, and Emily was looking at me, searching for answers I didn't have yet. Could you imagine being in that moment? Knowing the people responsible for your child's education have already decided she doesn't belong? How would you react? Fight? Freeze? Cry? I wish I could say I had a master plan. I didn't. I just held her hand and braced myself, because what came next, the secrets behind that decision, would shake everything I thought I knew about her school. And no one could have predicted it. I thought the secretary just had bad news. Maybe a forgotten form, a minor issue with homework, something routine. But as soon as I stepped into the office, I realized this wasn't routine. Mrs. Reynolds avoided my eyes completely, her hands twisting a stack of papers like she was holding on for dear life. Emily clutched my hand tighter, her small fingers trembling slightly, and I felt a surge of protectiveness that made my stomach knot. Then he appeared, Principal Thompson. Tall, imposing, with a tone that brooked no argument. His eyes scanned me briefly before settling on Emily, like a judge evaluating a case he had already decided. And that's when he said it. We've all decided this school isn't for children like her. Every word landed like a hammer blow. Children like her? What did that even mean? My mind froze for a second, trying to decode the layers of judgment in that sentence. Emily's face fell, confusion mixing with hurt. Her usual spark, the curiosity that lit her eyes, flickered uncertainly. She looked at me, searching for guidance, for reassurance that this was a mistake. I felt my pulse hammering in my ears. Do I explode? Do I argue? Do I demand an explanation? The thing is, I didn't. I just held my ground and said, calmly, understood. My voice was steady, but my mind was racing, connecting dots that didn't make sense. What hit me hardest was not just the words themselves, but the way the office had shifted in that moment. The walls seemed to close in, the fluorescent lights flickered, and I felt the weight of every whispered decision that had led to this moment. I wanted to know why. I wanted to know what children like her even meant. I asked questions anyway, my tone measured, precise, trying to mask the storm inside me. But Principal Thompson remained distant, giving vague responses about program fit and behavioral considerations. It was clear this wasn't about Emily at all. This was about their perception, their convenience, their inability or unwillingness to see her for who she truly is. Could you imagine hearing that about your child? Seeing the place you trusted to nurture her suddenly brand her as unworthy? My mind raced, piecing together the subtle signals I had ignored, teacher emails, passing comments, strange looks in the hallway. And then it hit me, this wasn't just a one-time mistake. It was a pattern, a quiet judgment that had been building for months. Emily looked up at me, tears welling, and I knew something had to change. But I didn't yet realize the full depth of what had been hidden from us. What came next would uncover secrets I never expected, and it would force me to decide how far I would go to protect my daughter. After that confrontation, Emily refused to talk about what happened. She clutched her backpack like it was armor, her silence heavier than any words. I tried to coax her, to ask gently, "Do you want to tell me what happened in class?" But she shook her head, eyes downcast. That's when I realized I couldn't just wait for the school to explain itself. I had to find out the truth on my own. I started digging. Teacher emails, her class records, notes from counselors, anything that could shed light on why a school I trusted suddenly deemed my daughter not fitting. What I discovered made my blood run cold. Emily had been labeled as a child who might struggle with standard programs due to a minor learning difference she had shown in first grade. Something so small, something we'd been addressing quietly at home, had been magnified into a reason to push her out. The principal and staff hadn't even talked to me about it. They'd made a decision about my daughter's future behind closed doors. It wasn't just a bureaucratic mistake. It was a pattern of subtle exclusion. Teacher comments that seemed innocent at first, "Emily is a little distracted in class," or "she may need extra attention," were compiled and interpreted as evidence that she didn't belong. I felt a mixture of anger and disbelief. How could adults, entrusted with the care of children, so easily misinterpret a bright, creative mind as a problem? The more I uncovered, the more I realized that the school's decision wasn't about Emily at all. It was about convenience. They wanted a child who fit neatly into their expectations, someone who wouldn't challenge routines or require extra effort. And Emily, with her questions, her creativity, her sensitive nature, didn't fit that mold. Could you imagine a system that judges children not on who they are, but on how convenient they are to adults? I was furious, yes, but also determined. I refused to let them define her worth. And yet, there was one more layer I hadn't uncovered, the one that would shock me the most. There was something in the school's files, a detail they hadn't expected a parent to find, something that explained their harsh words and cold behavior. As I closed the folder, my heart sank. They had been watching, analyzing, and making decisions about my daughter for months. And I hadn't even known. What came next would force me to confront not just the principal, but the entire system, and it would push me and Emily into a showdown neither of us could have prepared for. I knew I couldn't let them erase Emily's confidence without a fight. The words "children like her" had burned into my mind, and every time I looked at her, I felt that mix of anger and protectiveness rising again. I scheduled a meeting with Principal Thompson and the school board, determined to get answers and demand accountability. Emily was nervous, clutching my hand as we walked into the conference room, her small frame tense but resilient. I could feel her fear, but also a spark of courage that hadn't been there before. The principal arrived first, eyes calculating, posture rigid. He didn't smile. He didn't apologize. The board members shuffled papers, whispering quietly, avoiding eye contact. I began calmly, stating the facts I had uncovered, the exaggeration of Emily's minor learning difference, the lack of communication, the secret judgments. I watched their reactions closely. Some were defensive, some surprised, some uncomfortable, and one teacher quietly nodded in support. Then I let the silence speak. I described Emily, the curious, bright, empathetic child who loved reading, drawing, and asking questions. I spoke about her laughter, her creativity, and her sensitive heart. I asked pointed questions. How can you judge a child without knowing her? How can you decide she doesn't belong based on convenience? Their responses faltered, and the tension in the room was palpable. It became clear that the problem wasn't Emily. It was their perception, their fear of children who don't fit neatly into boxes. They had misinterpreted her quiet confidence as a problem, her questions as defiance, and her uniqueness as a challenge. The irony wasn't lost on me. A school, meant to nurture and protect, had nearly broken my daughter's spirit. Emily's eyes met mine. I whispered, "We're going to fix this." And then, in that charged silence, an unexpected ally spoke up, a teacher who had always supported Emily. She defended my daughter's intelligence and creativity, exposing the inconsistencies in the administration's reasoning. The room shifted. Authority felt less absolute, judgment less final. But even as I felt a small victory, I realized this wasn't just about the school. It was about the system that allows children to be judged without parents' knowledge, about the assumptions that can shape a child's life without evidence. And I knew deep down that what came next would set the tone for Emily's future, and it wouldn't be easy. We were only at the beginning of a battle that would define her confidence, her sense of belonging, and the way she sees the world. Walking out of that meeting, holding Emily's hand, I felt a mix of exhaustion, relief, and determination. Relief because we had spoken, because our voices had been heard. Exhaustion because the fight to protect her had revealed just how fragile a child's sense of belonging can be. But most of all, determination, because no one would ever make Emily feel like she didn't belong again. The days that followed were small victories. We enrolled her in a new school, one that celebrated curiosity instead of punishing it. Teachers there noticed her creativity, encouraged her questions, and allowed her to shine in ways the old school never had. Emily smiled more. She laughed more. And slowly, I watched the fear and doubt that had been planted in her by words like children like her fade into confidence. She began to believe in herself again, and that was the most important thing. I often think back to that moment in the principal's office, the hallway heavy and silent, Emily's eyes wide with confusion. Could I have done more? Maybe. Could I have prepared her for the judgment? Perhaps not. But what I realized is that the system will never be perfect, and people will sometimes make mistakes or, worse, assumptions, but we have a choice. We can either let them define our children, or we can fight for their worth. To parents watching this, your child's value isn't determined by a single teacher, a principal, or a school system. Their worth isn't measured by convenience or conformity. It's measured by the love, support, and belief you give them at home, and the courage you show when you stand up for them. Emily will never forget that day. I won't either. And I hope that story reminds you to fight for your child, even when the odds feel stacked against you. So I ask you, what would you do if someone dismissed your child without understanding them? Would you stay silent, or would you rise, even when it's uncomfortable, even when it's terrifying? Because the truth is, standing up for them isn't just about fighting the school, it's about teaching them to believe in themselves, to never let anyone make them feel less than they are. And as we walked into that new classroom, hand in hand, I knew Emily had learned something invaluable. She learned that her voice matters, that her uniqueness matters, that she belongs no matter what anyone says. And that lesson will carry her far beyond any classroom, any principal, or any judgment she may face in the world. The fight isn't always easy, but the victory? The victory is in their confidence. And Emily's victory had just begun.